You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. I'm your bestest friend, Niki Sims, joined by the amazing nutrition guru, Gillian Ward.
Hi,
Gillian. Always great to have you on here and we get to talk about food, which we both love so much. So we're going to do something today. I don't think we've done this in a bit, but we're going to do a nutrition Q&A. We've assembled some questions. I think some of these come from our Instagram followers and from, I think we even have a couple from our coaches. So we're going to get to ask Gillian these questions. I'll chime in when I feel like I have anything useful. And we're going to talk about everything from hunger to recipes to changing your diet when the rest of your family maybe isn't changing their diets. And I think this will be a pretty juicy one.
I think so too.
Yeah. Real quick though, Gillian just got back from an RV trip, which means you're probably not around grocery stores and the kitchens are teeny. So how did that go with eating?
So I had the best of intentions before we left because I like to talk about preparation. I went so far as to prepare a meal for the night that we got home. So we were gone 5 days. I'm like, I'm going to have a meal. I'm going to freeze the meal. So when we get home, we have good food that night. And pretty much everything with nutrition went sideways.
Gillian is human, everybody. Gillian is human.
So I made a couple meals that last. I made a big turkey meatloaf with some pasta and giant amount of green beans. And I made a big chili and some rice. And typically we'll end up going to a bunch of local farmers markets and fruit and vegetable stands. We'll grill stuff and I'll get fresh fruits and vegetables. So this trip was a little bit different than usual. We went out to eat a couple times. It rained heavy in the evening, so we didn't get outside to grill. And we had very, very long days in the car on the road, like 500 or more kind of mile days, where it's difficult to be eating vegetables.
And to even want to drink a lot of water when you're just like
and you can't.
Sitting,
you can't.
Not
when
going to the bathroom.
We've got 2 dogs. We've got a 32-foot RV behind us, a huge truck. You can't. I'm always like, hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Well, you don't get to unless you want a 10-hour trip to take 16 hours.
For sure.
So we left on Tuesday. We got back on Sunday. I had 1 apple on Tuesday.
Oh, dear Lord. I instantly feel uncomfortable.
And normally tons and tons of vegetables and a moderate amount of fruit. And we got to Scott's family's house in Maryland on, I want to say, Friday evening. And I was like, finally, I'll get a salad or something. I'll have some kind of vegetables. And his mom ordered in local barbecue. And awesome. I could have gotten a salad, but I didn't want to miss out on everybody else eating these yummy brisket sandwiches and barbecue and all that other stuff. Totally. And of course, I went with everybody else and had like a loaded brisket and cheese sandwich with French fries.
Oh boy, that sounds very, very friendly to the gut.
The other thing we didn't get to do, so we got to train a couple times, but normally we walk. Usually somewhere between 4 and 8 miles a day. So not only wasn't eating fruits or vegetables, wasn't drinking water, and wasn't walking. So you could imagine my digestive system was all kinds of thrown off.
Oh, man.
So I'm feeling guilty about this. Next morning comes, we're able to take a walk. We go for a walk with Scott's sister. And I start complaining about how I haven't eaten any fruits and vegetables, so my tummy's thrown off. I'm not going to go into crazy details about that, but I was feeling a little bit bloated.
I'm feeling, even you saying this aloud, I'm feeling like I'm 5 pounds heavier in my stomach just out of empathy.
And she's like, you had vegetable last night. She's like, you had potatoes, you had French fries. So I'm like, let's go with that. And then she's like, I think that we had either blackberry or black raspberry barbecue sauce on the brisket. And she's like, that's fruit. And I was like, I know I had ketchup on my burger earlier in the week. And I started adding this stuff up. And like a pickle was probably the closest thing that I got to a vegetable.
Oh boy.
And like I said, it was something that I had the best of intentions going into it. And what ended up happening was the only vegetables I had planned were the green beans, and we did not get to eat them because we ended up eating while driving. So we'd pull over, I'd run into the back of the RV, I would take a giant piece of meatloaf and put it on bread. So it was basically bread and meat. And there was one night,
loafception.
It was probably Saturday night, our last night there. And Scott went in to take a shower and he walked out and I was like shoveling green beans, cold green beans in my face.
Your body was like, thank you. Finally.
It's just an example. Like, again, I had the best of intentions and everything went completely sideways. I knew that there was no way I was getting on a scale this morning.
Oh, dear God, no. Yeah, that's the best time to not get on a scale.
And like, it was one of those workouts where like everything hurt.
Yeah.
And stuff. Like you get down, you do 5 push-ups, everything hurts. Like your rings don't come off. Your shoes feel tight.
The belt is on the big hole. Yeah. So what do you do to feel back to normal?
So first, hydrate and drink lots of water. The other thing is not to obviously get out and shop as soon as I can and lots of fruits and vegetables back, but is to not go crazy by restricting, is really just to get back to whatever my normal eating is.
Yeah.
Like get up that next morning, have my normal breakfast. So what I don't try not to do is the urge just to not eat. Very often when someone feels super bloated or they overate or didn't eat the right things, they often just choose, I'm going to skip breakfast or I'm not going to eat. So what I wanted to do is get all of those good foods back in me and get back to my regular habits.
I like that. I remember we talked about that at the end of Block Party. We're just like, all right, we've eaten a lot of really good food. It's not our normal schedule, not in our normal homes. And just the tendency for sure is be like, well, I've eaten all I need to eat for the next 3 days. So I'm just not going to eat at all. But then you end up eating a whole bunch again because you get hungry because of course you're going to get hungry.
And it affects, I'm so glad I wasn't around mirrors and everything I had was an elastic waistband because when I saw the circles under my eyes this morning, the little sodium pillows.
It's crazy when you notice the difference between being hydrated and eating fruits and vegetables and then not. You feel terrible.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the other thing was to avoid, it's very habitual to have like road snacks. And it's something that I've taught Scott is like, if you are on the road, there are things that make you feel worse.
Oh, what are those?
So things like sodas. Think about the things we stop and get caffeine and we're on the road. And like one of his old go-tos was like lots of peanut M&Ms and Diet Coke.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Right. And then you just keep eating more sugar and more junk and more sodas. And some of the rules we have on the road is that we do all either water or sparkling water. Like if you're used to it or grew up doing it, you'll have this craving to eat or drink something that you wouldn't normally do, especially if you're fatigued.
Absolutely. My go-to is Tootsie Roll Pops because they make the time go by.
And I grew up like eating Twizzlers, lollipops, candy on the road.
Yep.
And one of the things, so we did eat meatloaf sandwiches on the road, but we made a commitment. We're like, we're not going to have sugar and stuff. We're not going to eat a bunch of candy. We're not going to drink sodas. We're not going to overdo the caffeine beyond like our normal morning coffee we drink in the morning. And in some respects, we did feel better than if we would have, sat and ate bags of Twizzlers and drank sodas.
Yeah. So much the instant gratification choice or the how am I going to feel in 24 hours choice. Yeah. Well, that brings me to an important question. Can you count the cauliflower crust in cauliflower pizza as a vegetable? The delay in your answer is making me think you're going to say no.
I think you can. Were there vegetables on top of the cauliflower crust pizza?
Does a mushroom count?
What else was on it?
Sausage and pepperoni. Bacon.
What else did you eat that day?
Oh, plenty of like tons of fruit, vegetables. Yeah. Yeah. I had my normal eating, which is like eggs, veggies, tons of fruit. We had a little dilemma. We're like, should we make a salad or does the crust count? I know we should have made a salad. Anywho. All right. So first question, this one comes from Dan, and he says, hunger is obviously subjective and the amount of hunger you experience will depend on your goals and action plan. But for a typical person attempting to gradually lose weight, so not someone gaining or maintaining, but also not a bodybuilder right before a competition, what can we expect for hunger? For example, should you be hungry before your meals? And if so, how soon before your meals? What might be a signal that you've cut calories back more than necessary?
So Generally speaking, if you're in a deficit, there should be or some amount of hunger. But the first things we want to do, it shouldn't be extreme. So in terms of it not being extreme, more often than not, people mistake thirst as hunger. So one of the things you'll often hear when people are losing weight, drink water, other than the numerous benefits, water is probably going to take the edge off some hunger. The other reason for hunger, not only because of being in a deficit, is usually poor food choices. So if you eat balanced and you have good fats in your diet and there's protein and you're not eating carbohydrate alone, you're going to feel more satiated than eating carbs by themselves. So you could be eating in surplus more than what you need and feel hungry because you made poor food choices.
Oh, dang.
So give you an example of that. You could be in a surplus. You may not be in a deficit at all. You wake up in the morning, you have a cup of coffee loaded with sugar and stuff and 2 donuts. And you are ravenous 2 hours later.
Totally.
We've all experienced that.
For sure.
Or like, well, we talked about road snacks. You eat Tootsie Roll lollipops and you're starving, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I'm shaking. I need to eat real food. So limiting that hunger is largely going to come from balancing your meals and controlling your blood sugar. So carbs, protein, and fat, having probably some amount of fat is going to be helpful, and protein in that snack. So that's just hunger overall. In terms of should you be hungry, hunger is perception, right? Do you agree? So I think there are some people that are uncomfortable just being hungry at all. And I've encountered that. And some of it's getting to know your hunger. Like, are you having difficulty concentrating? Is your stomach growling? Like, what do you even mean when you say you're hungry? Are you getting moody and irritable? So I think somebody understanding what that is first is important. If you are eating correctly, you should never be ravenously hungry while you're in a deficit.
Oh, that's cool.
So another thing for some people is it's probably not going if you're making good choices and eating clean foods. So we'll talk about intermittent fasting as something separate because that's another way people prevent hunger. But for a lot of people, eating with frequency is going to help prevent hunger. Like, look at like what a bodybuilder does. I know we were not talking about bodybuilders, but eating pretty much every 2.5 to 3 hours and not letting yourself get to that bad place.
Okay.
On the other side of things, you look at something like intermittent fasting where somebody goes, 12 hours or more without eating. And there are people that will find for them without eating, they have less hunger than if they do eat. Because for some people, you start to eat and that opens the floodgates. It's not that you're starting to eat and it opens the floodgates. It's usually the poor choices that opens the floodgates of hunger.
Would it be safe to say that if you're feeling very hungry, you're not only hungry for food, you're hungry for nutrients?
Correct. That is very, very safe. So again, getting used to some amount. In a deficit, you are not going to be, there is a difference between being overfull or being very full and hungry are 2 different things. And again, it's really understanding what do you even mean when you say you're hungry? We've all been in a bad place where like we have the shakes and we need to eat and we're hangry and we're biting people's heads off. But there's a lot of in between that and being full.
I can see how your like food diary, food journal would be really useful for this. Yeah. So you could be like, oh, I'm feeling starving. I already ate. But then you'd be like, oh, well, actually, what did I eat 30 minutes ago or 2 hours ago? Right. And you can see if it was high in sugar and lacking nutrients.
It's really examining what's in there. It's like if we keep the fiber content way up and the fluid content of those foods up and the high protein content, you're not going to experience the same hunger as if all you ate all day was apples. So yes, if you're in a deficit, there's going to be some amount of hunger, but it comes down to making the right food choices and combining foods at your meals the right way so that you don't experience hunger.
Yeah. Uncomfortable hunger.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. And that'll be nicer for everybody who you're living with and interacting with during the day.
Yeah. And more extreme hunger, sometimes people feel like they're on a diet. Like the more hungry they are, the more the diet is working. It's not necessarily hunger is not necessarily a reflection, what we call hunger, not true hunger, but what we call hunger of a true deficit. Really, it is, what is it that you're eating? Let's look at what it is that you're eating.
Cool. Okay. Next one comes from Karen. She says, obviously, it's not quite as easily defined to be a linear progression for nutrition because the actions taken and behaviors addressed vary widely from person to person. But what might define the differences between intermediate and advanced nutrition athletes or clients versus novices? what might be behaviors or actions that you associate with more intermediate or advanced clients?
So with that, we've got to look at that on a couple of levels, because the first thing to look at is nutritional knowledge. So it's hard to even quantify what is an intermediate or advanced nutrition athlete, because are we talking about their knowledge of nutrition? Are we talking about their skill level with food preparation and how much planning ahead they're doing? So you could be advanced in one area. For instance, you could have an exceptional amount of nutritional knowledge, but maybe you're not finding the time to food prep. And, maybe you're not able, maybe your schedule doesn't allow for it. So we really need to look at each of those individual things when we're looking at how far progressed somebody's skill level is. Generally speaking, across all of it, the very first thing we want is a general understanding of eating healthy and getting somebody feeling good. And for most people, that's going to come down to understanding what they're currently doing and just how that food makes them feel. So that's going to be across beginners, intermediate, and advanced. So making good choices at whatever level you're at. So more advanced may be, so for instance, is something like tracking in an app. Would you consider that to be beginner, intermediate, or advanced?
I would put that in any person's.
Right.
Yeah. Because anybody can do that. It's a tool. It's not really an identifier.
I see advanced as skillful planning.
Yeah.
So somebody that's going to take the time and stuff to understand their needs and to be prepared for the week. So to me, advanced is somebody that's done more food prep in terms of, rather than just kind of waiting for the next meal to figure out what they're going to eat. A lot of that is skill and time management more than necessarily advanced.
Yeah.
I'm not making sense. Am I making any sense?
Yeah. I see, I think we really can't go apples to apples with strength training, because in my opinion, someone who's advanced with their nutrition has a high level of awareness of what makes them feel a certain way, and then also decides to make the choice to feel a certain way and accept their choices. So they know that if I eat this, I will feel this way. And sometimes they'll decide, I'm okay with feeling that way. And then I will adjust around it. Nutrition doesn't happen to them.
Yes.
They have control over it.
You said that so well.
Is what I would call advanced.
Yep.
People who I would say are more novice, they're at war with their body, they're at war with food, and they don't know how to work together with it. But the more advanced you get, you become more familiar with awareness and the tools you can use to make yourself feel a certain way.
Yep. Like what food does to you and what food does for you. And that's how I see kind of as you advance through nutrition.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, I love this one. This one's from Steve. He says, I saw the idea of small wins come up on the panel Q&A from the block party. What are some typical actions you recommend to clients going along with this idea of small wins? There are so many. This is great.
I love that. And there's one that I really like, which is anytime someone makes a good decision with their food that is different than their norm.
Ooh.
So, they go out to eat and they go to this restaurant and normally they order 24 wings and sauce, this, that, and the other. And they go there and they make a decision that is better for them than that decision. Mm-hmm. So I see that as a small win. There's no limit to how many small wins we can have. So I like to accumulate lots of them. And I like to look at nutrition the same way I look at training as one rep at a time. I like to look at nutrition as one meal at a time. So you get to win every time you put something in your mouth. Mm. So, you win for the meal, you win for the day, then the week, then the month. So you wake up in the morning and you have a good, nutritious breakfast. That's a win for the day because you could have made a poor choice. You could have gotten up and had 3 donuts and a sugary frappuccino for breakfast. And instead you woke up in the morning and had eggs and oatmeal. So there's a win.
Yeah, for sure. Or you add a vegetable to your breakfast.
Absolutely.
You start to track how much water you're drinking. Even without having to change anything, you just start to learn. What would be like a small win?
Bringing your lunches.
Yeah.
Like this small, and everything adds up. I know we talk about this concept often, but it's just, even changing one meal and stuff, even if it's a matter of this week, or if you plan, maybe you're not going to get it right for 5 days, or maybe Thursday you're going out to lunch at the office, but you bring your lunch Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. So that would be a small win.
I think a small win could just be people appreciating the things that they've done. Like maybe you don't even realize how many good things you're doing for your nutrition and you're just beating yourself up all the time. And you might actually be doing a pretty good job. Yay, small wins. Well, did you have a small win? A whole bunch of small wins this morning?
So I prefer the small wins over the guilt. I would rather add up all of the stuff that I did well and keep wanting that to add up to be more and more than to be adding up all of the stuff that I did poorly.
Yeah, I am the same way. It just feels better. Like you can choose to be disappointed in yourself or you can choose to be proud of yourself. And if you allow yourself to feel happy about the things that you've done, you're going to keep doing those things more than the things that make you feel badly about yourself.
Yep.
Yeah. And then it's okay when you have Cadbury eggs during the day. Oh my God. I need to stop talking about Cadbury eggs. Moving on.
Are you having Cadbury eggs in September?
Yeah, because I friggin' hoard them when they're out for Easter. So I never run out. I'm like a squirrel or I like hide them around the house. Funny, I actually just reorganized my pantry the other day and I have a whole little basket just for chocolate and there were like 4 Cadbury egg bags in there. My small win is not eating an entire bag of Cadbury eggs. Anyway, so here's a good follow-up. This one's from Kurt. He says, Gillian, this might be a bit beyond a nutrition coach's purview, but if someone is reporting regular gastric distress like irregularity, upset stomach, diarrhea, etc., what are some things you might think about in terms of triaging this? And then what are things you might actually look at or questions you might ask?
So the first thing we want to identify is if they could identify a cause. So if somebody's experiencing gastric distress, I would start by having them keep a visual food diary of everything that they're eating and identify the severity of the symptoms, the onset of the symptoms, how long it lasts for. And we do that over a period of several days. So can they identify the foods that are upsetting them? If we're not seeing any clear patterns and they are unsure of what that is, or the symptoms are very severe, I'm actually going to recommend first that they go see a doctor. I want to rule out anything more severe before assuming that it's specific foods, which is helpful no matter what, to rule out any type of severe illness. We may have them tested for a food allergy, but more often than not, when you have somebody start keeping a visual food diary and really understanding how they feel from what they're eating, they're going to be able to figure out, or you'll figure out together what foods are causing that.
Yeah. And that seems like something a doctor would have you do anyway, is be like, doctor, my stomach hurts. They're going to be like, well, what did you eat?
Yep.
You might save some time there by getting ahead of it.
Sometimes it's harder, especially with as many packaged foods, processed foods, foods that have multiple ingredients. Sometimes it's hard to find the actual root cause of it. But I would want to look at, like, in addition to seeing what people are eating, I mean, there's stuff that, recently in the last several years, we've seen a huge uptick in people drinking like carbonated flavored seltzers, correct? You see it all the time.
Big time. Yeah.
And just looking at something like that could be upsetting someone's stomach. Somebody may have, and they may not even include that because they're like, oh, it's just water. There's no calories in it. So when we keep this, we want as much information as possible. I want to see everything somebody's eating, everything they're drinking. Maybe they're taking a whole bunch of anti-inflammatory drugs like Advil or something that's upsetting their stomach that you're not aware of. Maybe
they're drinking a gallon of water in 3 hours or something horrible. Yeah.
Going to try to pull out as much information as possible on that. What the sleep patterns are like, their stress levels are like, and see if we see anything clear with that. And if there is a connection, I would probably start with some types of food eliminations, whatever, and then slowly add that back in and see if we could identify it.
Okay, cool. So you're collecting data and then you're looking for patterns, which you may not even need a nutrition coach to do. Like you could do that for yourself.
Right. Yeah. And I'd want that data collected. Again, I'm probably going to make a medical referral if it's severe, but it would be great data, even for somebody to have to bring to their doctor rather than saying, I have no idea what is causing this. I have no idea what's causing the bloating. I have no idea. Bloating could be caused by chewing a bunch of sugarless gum. Bloating could be caused by an excessive amount of artificial sweetener. Bloating could be caused by, protein bars. So I think just having somebody examine all of that.
Cool. Okay, here's a question. And I'm going to have to ask you to define something for me. Alexis asks, are FODMAPs unhealthy? What are they? Should I avoid them? Or what might be reasons I would avoid them? And okay, what the heck are those?
Okay, so a FODMAP is basically a short chain carbohydrate or sugar.
Okay.
So the actual definition of this, and you'll have to excuse me if I pronounce any of the difficult words wrong, is a fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharide, or polyols. So those are what FODMAPs are. But basically, for our general purposes, it is going to be a very short chain carbohydrate that the small intestine absorbs poorly. So some people, basically, if people that have IBS, that's kind of who you would do a FODMAP or whatever. The word itself doesn't mean anything. When people say I'm on a FODMAP diet, it is a diet low in those short chain carbohydrates.
Okay. What's an example of a food that is high in those?
So high would be most dairy products, milk, ice cream. Oddly, cheese is not high in FODMAPs. A lot of fruits are high. A lot of vegetables are high. Wheat is high. Lentils are high. Beans are high. The difficult part is that there's nothing obvious to us about high or low foods. So if you looked at a list of all fruits and vegetables, you would find about half the fruits fall on the very high side. Apples, peaches, pears, cherries, and then some other foods, bananas, some berries fall on the very low side. So it's not an obvious thing for us.
Yeah.
So it'd be very easy to say, all foods that look like this fall into high FODMAP, and all foods that look like this fall into low FODMAP. So like high FODMAP, onions, garlic are super high, snap peas are super high. In terms of low, corn is low, oatmeal is low. But again, there's not anything clear that would tell you. So if it was something that you thought you were sensitive to, you would actually have to look at a food list on that. So because the absorption is poor in the small intestine based on high FODMAP foods, is that by eliminating them, you're going to reduce gas, bloating, extra fluid in the gut. So if you have IBS, or sometimes where people have problems with gut bacteria, what's recommended is that you go with all low FODMAP foods for a period of a couple of weeks. It is not designed to eliminate all of these foods forever. So what you would do is reduce the high FODMAP foods for a period of a couple of weeks, and then you add them back one at a time. So also speaking to the previous question is, let's figure out what it is that you are sensitive to. You may not be sensitive to all of that. You may be sensitive to the wheat and not the dairy, or the dairy and not the wheat, or lentils and not fruits. They're all so different
in their own.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is for someone just to follow a low FODMAP diet is very difficult, because a lot of the foods that we talked about that are high are actually high fiber foods.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult on a low FODMAP diet to get the fiber that you need.
Then you'll run into other problems.
Yeah. But if you have IBS, or if there's a problem with some of the gut bacteria, we'll eliminate all of those things for a couple of weeks. Again, not forever. It's generally recommended no more than 6 weeks, but usually about 2 weeks. Take it there for about 2 weeks, and then to add foods back one at a time about every 3 days.
Sounds difficult.
But it should not be mistaken as a high FODMAP food. Does not mean that it is an unhealthy food. Some of the healthiest foods that have the best benefits to us are actually high FODMAP foods.
Yeah, the ones that you listed sound like all the tasty foods.
Yes. And there's lots of great fruits and vegetables on there.
Yeah. Okay. So I think an important takeaway from that is not saying that they're unhealthy, just stating what they do, which is they are not absorbed well by the small intestine, and kind of
correct.
Not making any assumptions just based off of what they're designated as.
Right.
Okay.
But there's no purpose. So common symptoms of somebody with IBS are going to be cramping, diarrhea, constipation, stomach bloating, excessive gas. If you're not experiencing those things, for somebody just to choose a low FODMAP diet, there is no purpose to do that. If you're not sensitive to it, keep those foods in there.
Yeah, there could be better ways to identify something. All right, one more real sciencey one. This one's from Sean. He says, if a client gets blood markers fairly regularly, what are blood markers you like to look at to help tell a story of increased health?
So a lot of blood markers, you're not going to see massive changes in with people. And some people could be doing a lot of the right things. Like cholesterol, for instance, is incredibly, incredibly genetic. You may see somebody put on cholesterol medication that is not necessarily have the healthiest diet and see a huge change in their cholesterol values medicated, where somebody, making dietary changes you may not see as eating really, really well could still have high cholesterol. I like to look at kind of the bigger picture. I'm not going to say the blood work's not important. The blood work is extremely important. I'm going to look at C-reactive protein. I'm going to look at A1C levels. I'd like to look at blood glucose, overall triglycerides and cholesterol. But I want to focus not so much, not that I'm not looking, but on the numbers in the blood work and focus on their behaviors, what they're eating, what their training is. Because I can't pick a number in the blood work and say, we're going to do something different designed around this. Because the truth is, what's healthy, a healthy way is going to be healthy for all of that. Yeah. So I want their skills, habits, strategies, exercise, proper diet first. And then I'm rambling a little bit on this.
No. What I'm hearing is actually really cool. Like, we look at business metrics for the company very frequently. And one of our filters in whether or not we're going to really rely on these metrics is asking ourselves, like, how will this data change our actions? And if it's not really going to guide us in one way or the other, then it's not a really useful metric to track. So it'll kind of help us dictate the frequency of which to track them. And similar to blood work, like, that is a metric, but you can't look at one of them and just like change everything, because will that action make any changes that are useful? Will it change the other ones? Like, yes, no, maybe, but the actions are really in place. What you're saying, when you have like good habits, the actions of what you need to do anyway to manipulate those numbers as much as you can are already occurring.
Yeah. Focusing on making the changes with the habits, exercise, nutrition.
Yeah.
And again, so what I see is people sometimes fixate on a number and they go insane trying to change these numbers.
With body fat percentage.
We see this with cholesterol or following a low cholesterol diet.
Yeah.
So what you'll see is exercise and good eating. Yes, you're going to be able to control to some degree your blood glucose. You're going to be able to control your A1C levels, C-reactive protein levels. You will be being healthy. You can somewhat control those numbers. But over the years, what I've seen is people fixate on something and then they start living their life. Like, we've seen someone has high cholesterol and it's like, well, I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to have shellfish. I'm not going to have eggs. I'm not going to have meat. I'm not going to have this. And they've lost sight of the bigger picture when they fixate on a specific number that's in the blood work. So doing nutrition-based stuff based on blood work is out of my scope. So I am not a registered dietitian. So I am not going to do nutrition coaching based on looking at someone's blood work.
Yeah.
Those numbers are not helpful. I recommend that everybody does get regular blood work. It's interesting to see something out of range. Like, for instance, vitamin D deficiency. Sometimes you'll see that on blood work, and just getting your vitamin D up can make somebody feel so different and dramatically improve their health. But I am not going to design my nutrition coaching based on blood work.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Big fan of vitamin D, by the way.
But health markers that I do want to look at, like, in addition to, again, having somebody regular blood work, is I think it's important to track blood pressure. I think body mass index to some degree. I mean, some of us with more muscle are going to have higher body mass index, but body weight and body composition are important. Again, just looking at bigger picture.
And what kind of intervals? How often would you have those tested?
I think for a healthy person, blood work generally is going to be once a year. If somebody has a problem in any of those areas, it's clearly going to be more frequently. So if you have high blood pressure, maybe you're using a home reader. If your blood pressure is excellent or normal, you're probably only getting your blood pressure read when you go for your physical. So the frequency of that is going to be determined by your health status.
All right. Here's one from Brittany. She asks, how do you go about training clients on low carb diets, or how do you discuss the potential benefits and costs of such a diet when it comes to a typical client who is strength training and doing a bit of conditioning?
So the first thing is going to be understanding the choice for a low carb diet. So people are going to choose a low carb diet for a variety of reasons. Probably the most popular reason that people choose it, a low carb diet, is they believe they're going to lose weight. So that's going to be, I will lose weight if I follow a low carb diet. Yes, you will if your overall calories are lower.
Yeah. There has to be more to that sentence.
Right. So I think it's understanding the why. You're going to feel different. When you don't have as much glycogen stores and you are not using carbohydrate for energy, if you are truly on a very low carb diet, you are going to feel different in the gym, especially initially. So some of the things that you'll get when people switch over to a low carb diet is their muscles don't feel as full, or they don't feel as pumped, or things start hurting earlier in the workout, or sometimes they'll feel even winded or out of breath. So there's some initial changes if you are not using carbohydrate as fuel during your workouts. I think that the real question is trying to understand why the person made that choice and what the priority is. So in terms of training, is the priority the result that you're trying to achieve with low carb dieting? Is the priority your training? And a low carb diet is different than a very low calorie diet. So theoretically, there are plenty of people out there that follow ketogenic diets or some kind of low carb diet and still train.
Yeah.
There are athletes out there, that use fats and stuff as fuel, that don't use carbohydrate. Their body adapts to it and they do very well with it. So is that low carb diet designed to be a low calorie diet? If you are on a low calorie diet, yes, you are going to feel different in the gym.
Yeah.
If you are in a big deficit, you are going to have less energy. And then it comes down to understanding, again, what is that person's priority? Because performance and weight loss or fat loss could sometimes oppose each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like we can have a couple different types of client here. We could have a client who wants to lose weight and they want to lose weight by going into a caloric deficit, and they want to do that by eating fewer carbs. But you have to have like the reality check there of like, you're going to feel pretty not great while training because you're going to not have carbohydrates right away.
Tougher to be hydrated. Yep.
Yeah, tougher to stay hydrated. And you're not going to be able to perform as you were. So you have to adjust that so that you can feel okay during training. But remember that the goal is that you're losing weight. The goal isn't really as much your performance. But you can also have a client who is training for performance and does that with a low carb diet. Can they still perform well after a certain amount of time, after they get used to it?
They can.
Yeah.
And I think I personally am not a huge fan for athletes for low carb diets. But I have seen many of top level athletes that do have low carb diets. But again, the quality, having a low carb or high or moderate carb diet has nothing to do with food quality. So you could follow a low carb diet and eat nothing but like salami and deli meat, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to feel that great.
Yeah.
So what do you even mean by a low carb diet? Because a lot of people will say that, but they still have an abundance of vegetables.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing is, what does somebody mean when they tell you that?
Like they might just be cutting out carbs, which means they're not eating bread.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's really understanding what are carbs, because at the end of the day, even lettuce is a carb, right? And very little bit even lettuce. So it's really knowing, what does somebody mean by that?
Okay, cool. The answer is always to dig deeper. Okay, we probably both have tons of answers on this, but let's keep it to like 1 or 2 answers each. Are there any recipes or food you've been going to more recently? I guess there are any healthy foods or recipes you really enjoy and go to recently, especially that you've discovered since the original nutrition series. So, recipes. Go.
So I think we saw an article last week that Brittany wrote for the Friday 5, which was Death by Chicken. And I did get a great chicken recipe from her. And I think I've adapted a little bit. It's chicken salsa verde, and it tastes amazing. And it is some kind of cut chicken, whether you use tenderloins or just chicken breast, and then taco seasoning on it. You could use a clean packet of it. You can make your own taco seasoning, cover it with salsa verde, bake it, or put some cheese over it. And that's something that I've been going to pretty regularly. I can honestly say where I live, I've had some problems. I've had to get used to just going with what they have in the store rather than thinking ahead, because there have been times here that I'll go to the store and I'll want chicken or I'll want something else and I can't get it. So I've had to adapt things a little bit more. And I've just kind of been in the phase where I do everything seasonal, more willing to try like possibly different meats and different cuts of meats. But I can say the chicken salsa verde is the only recipe I could think of that I've been using somewhat frequently.
Yeah.
What do you got?
I love this cookbook that my sister-in-law got me. It's the Ultimate Instant Pot Healthy Cookbook, which seems cheesy, but there's actually a ton of really good stuff in there because pretty much everything that the cookbook calls for is just single ingredient. And I love Instant Pot cooking because I kind of hate chicken when it's raw and disgusting. So I like that I can put it into this cauldron and then it magically turns into ready to eat chicken. But so I use that a ton. But one of them that I love is salsa chicken. So I throw in a load of chicken breasts and then I pour a can of salsa in there with some, I think I just use a regular chicken broth, if any. And then I'll shred that. And on top of it, I'll make rice or I'll mix in with cauliflower rice. I'll have that on top, which I mix with this tasty mixture of lime and cilantro. Oh, and jalapeno. So shred those. I have a little food processor that I shred that in. Then I'll mix that into the rice and cauliflower rice. And to that, I'll sometimes add like shredded cabbage or I'll put a bunch of kale in it. So I just kind of beef up the base with some extra vegetables. And then I'll make this crema sauce with Greek yogurt and a little bit of honey and fresh lime juice and some lime zest. And then I'll put that on top of the chicken. And
that sounds amazing.
Super tasty. And add some cilantro on top. Yeah. More death by chicken. All right, let's do this one. I'm super curious about. This one comes from Bill. He says, I've been trying and struggling to change my diet and lose some weight and have been bumping into some resistance because my wife does most of the shopping and cooking. Any ideas for how to work with my wife or things I can do to lose weight, but maybe arguing less?
That's such a great question.
That's so good.
The first thing is for Bill to sit down and have a conversation with his wife and talk to her about how important this is to him and why it's important to him and how she could be supportive of it.
He has to be really clear with what he needs.
Because more often than not, somebody doesn't know what to do. They don't know whether to just get out of the way and let you do your thing, or they don't know whether or not they could assist in some way. So I think the dialogue is important for them to have. Like, this is what I want to do. These are the steps that I want to take. And to hear from her side too. You know, what is she afraid? Maybe she, it's important that she eats meals together with him and she feels like they're not going to be able to. So I think being able to verbalize and express to that person what it is that you're trying to do and just have a real conversation about it, because there's so many different ways to go about that. Maybe he leads by example and starts making these good choices and the rest of the family joins him. Did he mention whether or not there are children?
He did not. No, just his wife.
So to get somebody to change, just to say, we should do this, not everybody wants to and not everybody's ready to. So if he leads by example and starts making those important changes and she sees positive things in him, that may be something that she wants to do as well. Maybe he decides to cook dinner for the family a couple of nights a week. And that's helpful to her. Possibly she was the primary cook before and he wants to eat different things rather than just cooking for himself. Maybe he makes enough of a portion that there's enough for the family to try. So those are the kind of behaviors that I would start with.
Yeah.
Or it's an agreement that, a couple of nights a week. Remember, we talked about small wins. So it doesn't have to be perfect all of the time, but then possibly to agree on, we're going to do dinners together, or I'm going to have my own breakfast and lunch, which are going to be my foods. And then we have dinner. But I think that conversation has to happen.
Yeah. And be, like you were saying, ask what kind of support. You might have to get really detailed with that because eating healthy might be different to one person than it actually is to you. So like, these are the things that I would add to the grocery list, or when we cook, maybe we could separate these two things. So you can take that chicken how you want to take it and I'll take it down the road how I want to take it, and give them some ideas so it feels collaborative instead of them being like, I'm not going to eat your cooking anymore,
Food is so personal and it can be so isolating when somebody in the family wants different behaviors or to start a diet. They do it and it's very isolating and, other people feel left out. And I have seen food cause so many tensions for families. When somebody wants to make a positive change or start doing something different. And, before the time comes to get the whole family to change or to start being preachy about it, really what they need to do is show their family how much better they feel, how much more energy they have, how enthusiastic they are. What has that improved health from their better nutrition? What does that enable them to do with the family? And the family, more often than not, will slowly follow suit.
Yeah. And don't be rude about it when you're just like, oh, you guys are going to eat some trash food. I'm going to eat my healthy food. Like,
right.
Don't be that guy.
Right. All of a sudden, you're going to start judging a behavior that you yourself did a week ago.
Yeah.
And that's something we often see, right? When people are eating a certain way or they've decided to go down a new path with a new diet, all of a sudden they're judging the person that's eating the burger and fries. And last week they were the person, or on Saturday night, they'll be the person that's eating the burger and fries.
Which you're really self-sabotaging because you need to be able to have a burger and, not have contradicted yourself. All right, here's an interesting one. This comes from Nick. He says, CJ, Matt, and others have discussed the various paths to becoming a barbell coach on the podcast. But what are the paths for a nutrition coach? This seems a bit more nebulous than becoming a barbell coach, as there is a career field of a registered dietitian, which doesn't seem to have an equivalent for barbell coaches. Also, it seems a bit less defined to take people aside and offer to provide them nutrition coaching. So there seems to also be this not clearly defined health coach. Would love to hear your thoughts.
I agree with all of that and not clearly defined. So we're going to talk a little bit about being a nutrition coach and then about being a Barbell Logic nutrition coach. So yes, a nutrition coach is not a registered dietitian.
And what is the important distinguishment between those two?
So a nutrition coach is not going to be able to prescribe a specific diet. So there are parameters. A nutrition coach cannot tell you in terms of the legalities of it, have 50 grams of sweet potato and 3 ounces of chicken and, 100 grams of green beans at meal this or meal that. So it's not going to prescribe foods. So nutrition coaching is largely going to be behavioral. It's going to be a lot of times to help people see the things that they're not seeing, to be there to motivate, to inspire, to educate, to inform, and to provide kind of context and direction. So for any type of nutritional field, number one, you're going to need some form of baseline education. So obviously a registered dietitian follows one path. There are several things out there for somebody interested in becoming a nutrition coach. Barbell Logic, we use precision nutrition as our baseline for nutrition coaching to get a really good understanding both of the science of nutrition and how to coach nutrition. Because understanding nutrition, knowing what vitamins and minerals and micronutrients are, is very, very different than guiding people to comply with nutritional recommendations.
Big time.
Right. So same thing, understanding the science of training is going to be very, very different than like dealing with somebody when they miss a squat.
The way you described what a registered dietitian does made me realize how, since we've had nutrition coaching in our business and we've tried and failed many different times to provide this service, I think the big difference is as coaches, it's like we're the registered dietitians of movement. We prescribe them exactly what they need to do, and we expect to see that exact thing. And if we don't see it, we give them another exact prescription. But we can't, like you just said, do that with food. And so the whole communication pathway and encouragement and support is so much different.
Right.
We can't make them be the same.
So for coaching nutrition, it's not going to be about follow this diet, eat these things, eat it in this quantity. Yes, there's going to be some talking about eating more vegetables or eating more fiber, getting more protein. Let's say you go to the hospital and you just had a heart attack and the RD comes in and is like, eat this, don't eat this, hands you a sheet of paper and is like, this is your diet.
Yeah.
Right. The nutrition coach happens after you get home when you have that in front of you. And like the registered dietitian really has nothing to do in that case, in that scenario, right? There are people that see a RD frequently. But in that scenario, it has nothing to do with compliance. So you came home and you share that list and you hand it to your husband or wife or somebody else or put it on the refrigerator. It's like, eat oatmeal, don't eat eggs, don't eat red meat, eat this, eat that.
Yeah, just like, holy crap, I'm really hungry now. What can I eat?
Right.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Who teaches you how to navigate through your day? Who teaches you, kind of how to prepare for a weekend event or set yourself up for the week, to eat right when you've got a million other things that are a priority. So nutrition coaching, in my mind, is a lot like life coaching. And again, that differs a little bit from training because training we do in a very regulated environment. Most people go into their same gym 3 or 4 times a week, and there's not a whole bunch of other people interfering. There's not somebody putting French fries on their plate, and we go and train.
Putting French fries onto their barbell.
Right. And nutrition is so different. Like, think of all of the different places that you eat, all the different times, and all of the different variables.
Yeah.
So nutrition coaching really is helping somebody kind of navigate their decision making.
Yeah. And you really have to learn what kind of questions to ask, why you would want to ask those questions and when, what type of information you need to hear, what kind of patterns you need to look for, and really dig into the why behind actions and then understanding what a person might need to change their actions, which is so different.
Right.
Than just giving them a sheet of paper. It'd be great if we could just be like, here's a sheet of paper, goodbye.
So it's going to be the knowledge of nutrition and then being able to, so a nutrition coach probably needs to have an enormous amount of patience.
Yes. Which is so funny because I love nutrition. I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I love it. I love learning from you. I love experiencing nutrition as a human being who loves to eat. But man, I don't enjoy coaching it.
Right. Because it's not about your knowledge and stuff. And so like after people say like, you're like magic with your ability to give macros and other stuff. I'm like, no, there's no such thing as that. Like there are some people, I would say, honestly, less than 10% of nutrition clients are what I would call extremely highly compliant.
Yeah.
Every now and then you have somebody, and that may be the kind of person that you could recommend macros to because they're going to hit it. They're going to follow it. They're going to count it correctly, not just use whatever fits best in MyFitnessPal that makes the most sense. But for most people, it's not about saying, broccoli is better for you than a Snickers bar, right? It's not about that at all. It's about how do we get broccoli on that plate,
yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And how do we work around them having that Snickers bar later in the day?
Yeah. Because the emotions, the guilt, the denial, all that is what you have to deal with, so much like a life coach.
But being a coach already, like somebody that's already a strength coach, already is in a better place to start.
For sure.
Because they're working with people. And the more information that you have, we've talked about this before, is can you do one without the other? Can you effectively coach strength without coaching nutrition? And can you deal with someone's nutrition without having any idea of what they're training or exercise in? So somebody is already in a good place if they wanted to coach nutrition to start by being a strength coach.
Yeah, because you can communicate. And that's the huge part of this is you can build a relationship.
I think another big piece of it as a nutrition coach, especially as a nutrition coach at Barbell Logic, we don't ascribe to any particular, very, very hard set specific nutritional philosophy. We find what works for the individual to meet their goals. So even on this podcast alone, we've talked about people on a low carb diet or keto, or somebody intermittently fasts, or maybe somebody's vegan. A nutrition coach should be able to handle all of those. And it should not be about getting everybody, hey, you should be vegan, or you should follow a low FODMAP diet, or, we should try this diet or that diet. It's really teaching somebody to design a plan that works for them.
That sounds difficult. I have so much respect for you nutrition coaches.
Well, the other thing is the sciencey stuff. When we talk about like how much nutritional knowledge does somebody need? Do you need the basics? 100%.
Yeah.
So I am not going to lie. I had to look up exactly what FODMAP. I was familiar with it, knew what it stood for, a couple of the words, and looked it up. But in terms of that stuff, the super sciencey stuff with it, that's stuff that you could look up.
Yeah.
So Do you need to know what carbs, proteins, fats, all of that other stuff? Like,
yeah,
sure. But in terms of the minor details, I think it's best if somebody's wanting to start out rather than spending so much time kind of in the hard science of learning what nutrition is. The real thing to do is start with yourself and start like the things that we've talked about as the first thing is fully understanding what you eat by whether it's keeping a visual food diary and accountability and understanding why you make your decisions, understanding that if you binge at certain times, why you do it, understanding that if you get hungry at certain times, why you do, understanding the impact of food on your body.
You want to get to that more advanced stage.
The same way as somebody, like more often than not, somebody coaches themselves, becomes their own coach first, right? And then they take clients. I would say same path for somebody interested in coaching nutrition is take the reins on their own nutrition, which was one would actually be to get a nutrition coach. So if we had to talk about steps, the first thing would be hire a nutrition coach so that you could understand what that process is. And at some point, take it over on your own. And then you are your own coach. And then from there, again, because we are not recommending, we are not registered dietitians. So as long as you know your parameters, there's nothing wrong with helping somebody in your life make better choices.
Cool.
I don't know if we answered the question at all just now.
I think so. Well, it sounds like the actionable thing, like you said, is to work on their own nutrition. We recommend the Precision Nutrition Level 1. I think they have a great way to lay out, like you said, the science behind everything, and then also how to coach behavior.
I think it's the most comprehensive thing I have seen out there that is short of a degree program.
Yeah.
And is one of the only ones that really addresses behavior and understands that nutritional behavior is not always in a linear way.
Okay, last question. This one's from me. Do you make any changes to a nutrition plan to accommodate the monthly cycle for your female clients?
So I won't write changes in there. But again, coming back to the same answer we've had most of the time is getting an awareness for that. So more often than not, somebody will be aware like, oh, I'm ravenously hungry for these couple of days, or I don't have an appetite at all, on this day. So it's really understanding the same way. I know we've talked about before putting like a calendar of events of like, these are the days that are going to be challenging on my nutrition. If somebody sees huge changes to their eating, what I like them to, based on their monthly cycle, I like them to track all of that together to kind of identify, like, am I ravenously hungry when I ovulate, or, am I ravenously hungry, when my period begins, to try to start taking a look at the big picture with that. So I don't do anything about stopping the cravings, because the cravings are more than just physiological. There's a psychology to cravings too. So let's say somebody craves chocolate before their period, right before, like, I really, really crave chocolate. That's not just a sugar craving. There is an association with chocolate that occurs at that time. So take, for instance, a 35-year-old woman has probably had a cycle at that point for at least 20 years where she associates possibly the day before her period and the first day that she is going to eat chocolate. So to say, you know what, you're really craving sugar.
That's so interesting.
So don't have chocolate. You're really craving carbohydrate. So instead of having that, let's have a banana instead. Well, that's just not going to work for that person. But let's say there's a period of a couple of days where cravings are up and calories are up. We're really just going to balance that out over the course of time, where maybe calories are a little lower on one side of it or the other side of it. But if we want to reduce those extremes that happen, I'm going to be honest, the best way to reduce all of the symptoms, like PMS symptoms in general, is going to be to get rid of processed and refined foods, or to reduce them. So that's going to be the number one thing, is to reduce refined and processed foods, stay incredibly well hydrated, and then overall keeping sugar and alcohol low.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a huge bummer, but
none of that sounds fun, because all you do.
Cool. Thanks for nothing. Just kidding.
But it's amazing how much you could change. Like, there are people that get horrible PMS that are just like, it could be headaches, nausea, anything, like excessive cramping and stuff. And just a couple of weeks of dietary changes could really, and they're not fun. I mean, none of the changes we talked about, like reducing sugar, alcohol, getting your water up, fiber down, but it's worth, for somebody that deals with serious PMS, it's worth trying an experiment.
Absolutely. For sure. And related to the nonlinear thing, like you have to take into account the whole length of the cycle, because you might have periods during your cycle where you actually are eating in a deficit because your appetite is low.
Right.
So over the course of the month, the whole month isn't like those days where feel like you're just eating everything in sight. Like on a monthly scale, you might be in a little bit of a deficit or you might be in a little bit of a surplus. So you have to look at the whole time domain.
And to look at normal trends in stuff like body weight, whether it's a waist measurement, body weight, because there may be a normal trend. There may be a period of the month where you retain a ton of fluid and you're 6 pounds heavier and you're like, oh my God, I gained all this weight.
And like, that's the time you get on the scale.
Right. And then you'll realize that no matter what, 3 days later, your body flushes it out.
Yeah.
So it's having somebody understand where those looking at the month, basically putting down their cycle and then layering the food, what they eat on top of it, and tracking weight, and realizing that all of that stuff for them is cyclical and normal.
That's really cool. I like the idea of thinking like, oh, it's not that it's period time that I have chocolate. It's just like, oh, it's the 26th and I need to have chocolate because I haven't had chocolate since the last 26. That's funny. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Gillian. That was amazing. I've learned so much as usual. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll get to talk your ear off another week. Thanks, Gillian.
Thank you for having me.